Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Actual Magician. Yes, I am an Actual Magician Explains videos, where today we are going to be taking a look at a slightly deeper dive into the Golden Dawn and the teachings of the Golden Dawn and what I consider to be the more important aspects, particularly for the neophyte and zealotor, the newbie, if you like, the newcomer to the Golden Dawn system, and particularly where I take inspiration from it for the Western Esoteric system that I teach. You can see that this is an old battered copy. This is the 6th edition of the book. I have several other of the older editions and a later edition as well. So we're going to be referencing either this one or we are going to be referencing the latest edition, which is the 7th edition of the Golden Dawn, revised and corrected by J.M. Greer. And this is, as it alleges, now restored to its purest form. There are some typos and glitches in different versions of this, but to be honest, nothing that a neophyte or a beginner can't really sort out or see for themselves, as long as you do the required studies, of course. And my older version, I did have some very old versions, but they're archived at the moment. But this is my long-time working version. It's been around the block a few times, and I devoured this when I was a lot younger. And I used to joke that it was the only book that came with a earth elemental to carry it around behind the aspiring magician, because it's a big brick of a book. And you can see that I've had this referenced on and off over the last 30 or 40 years. And so it can be very overwhelming to approach this. So we're going to look at the brief history of the Golden Dawn, and then we're going to take a look at some of the avenues into the Golden Dawn that you may wish to take. I'm going to do a follow-up video on the Tarot of the Golden Dawn and introduce our own version of the Tarot of the Secret Dawn, which is a previously undiscovered and unseen tarot deck within the adepts of the Golden Dawn itself. So watch out for that video. So let's take a look at the history of the Golden Dawn very briefly, and then we can take a look at some of the practical ways into the system. The Golden Dawn was actually founded in 1888 officially as the Isis Urania Temple, and that was founded by 3 people: MacGregor Mathers, 1854 to 1918, Woodman and Westcott, 1848 to 1925, and Robert Woodman, 1828 to 1891. These 3 people were members of not only the Freemasonic groups and lodges that were around at the time in late Victorian England, but also a group called the SRIA, the Society of Rosicrucians in Anglia. And out of that, they basically devised a system that was a synthesis of a lot of other systems. So it involves alchemy, it involves Kabbalah, it involves astrology, it involves tarot, it involves correspondences, it involves ceremonial magic as well. And they allowed both male and female members, and they had a grade system as well. So the impact of the order then continued once it had folded in on itself through members such as A.E. Waite, the poet Yeats, and notorious magician Aleister Crowley, who all came out of the Golden Dawn or transitioned through the Golden Dawn in their own esoteric studies. Now, the Golden Dawn was founded on a fiction to some extent, in that it was stated at the time there was a lot of interest in secret masters or secret chiefs or secret orders that gave credence to the teachings of the groups that were flourishing in late Victorian England. Authors such as Madame Blavatsky took their secret teachings and their secret masters from the East, but in the Golden Dawn it was a mysterious German adept who was said to have founded the order. And out of that came what were called the cipher documents. And the cipher documents are now reasonably acknowledged to have been written by well-known Freemason Kenneth Mackenzie, and it's likely that he had made notes for the foundation of an order or an arch within Freemasonry that would specifically study occultism or Western Esotericism, as it's now more generally known. So the cipher manuscripts are actually a very straightforward cipher. They're a substitution cipher, so each character stands for a letter or number in the English alphabet, and as a result they were readily decoded, and they give a structure for a magical order, and specifically they take things like the grade names and initiations from the SRIA, which is a development within Freemasonry. In fact, within the Golden Dawn, there was both an outer order and an inner order, which was accessed through the ritual of sacrifice or the crucifixion, the death and rebirth symbolism in the Adeptus Minor ritual. And this took place usually within a grand vault that was set up for the Adeptus Minor ritual. So even within the inner order, there were also other orders as well, or offshoots, little groups, little cliques, and so forth. And Florence Farr, a well-known actress of the time who was very influential in the teaching of the rituals in the order and the teaching of the knowledge lectures, as they were called, she formed another group called the Sphere Group that actually existed as a secret group within the secret group within the secret group. So people were very invested in the teaching of the order, in the practice of the order. But as I mentioned in our recent live video, the order really collapsed because the teachers were involved in political infighting, and as a result the students weren't being taught the main secret, which was of correspondences. Students were complaining that they were learning things, but they didn't know why they were learning them, or they were doing rituals, but they felt the rituals were empty and meaningless. And this is because they weren't applying the symbolism that they were learning in the knowledge lectures to fill out and explore the experience of the rituals that are only activated when you have the knowledge. And therefore, it's a self-protective system. It is a true esoteric or occult system, because you can only really experience it by learning, practicing, and experiencing it. You can't really learn all of the knowledge or practice all of the rituals without putting it all together. And this is really important in the Western Esoteric initiation system that I teach, is this synthesis that I learned from my first occult teacher of actually putting together the practice and the theory and putting them both together in order to catalyze initiation, which is a fundamental state change of your awareness and relationship to the universe itself, which is really at the core of this. Otherwise, it is all empty, performative knowledge or practice, and it's no use being able to evoke demons or angelic spirits or invoke various ancient Egyptian deities if you haven't already invoked your whole self into yourself. So there is a progressive sequence of state changes that really needs to happen in order to fully benefit from these teachings. And they're not empty teachings. They are very, very specific. They are very well formulated. And though they are synthetic, they do allow us to learn in the most effective and to some extent safe way possible. So what would a Golden Dawn member actually learn then? Well, for example, upon reaching the grade of Philosophers, they would have to learn the 5 rituals, the initiation rituals, and be able to explain and explore why those rituals are set up as they are. For example, the movements in the temple, the order of invocations, the knowledge that's imparted within those rituals, the tarot symbolism, the Kabbalistic symbolism. At a particular grade, you would have to have disassembled and reverse engineered all of that so that you understood the basic principles on which all of this was built. In effect, the adepts were expected to be able to write and construct their own rituals, their own tarot deck, their own teachings, and indeed students like Florence Farr, in some of her unpublished writings that I've seen in the Golden Dawn archives, really pursued the knowledge and the sense of correspondences in order to explore lots of different religious systems and so forth and try and unify the teaching within them. She also applied the teaching to small plays, for example, the magical plays like the Beloved of Hathor, the Shrine, the Golden Hawk, the Mystery of Time, and so forth, that she actually applied her theatrical skill to the teachings themselves and to bringing the ancient Egyptian mysteries to life. And Crowley did this as well with the Eleusinian mysteries, and also Mathers and Moina Mathers did this in Paris with the rituals of Isis that they practiced and performed in effect in Paris. The philosophers would also have to learn 3 side lectures, which were geomancy, the tarot and their attribution to the Hebrew alphabet, and a side paper or knowledge paper called The General Guidance and Purification of the Soul. Now, some of these things were core to the Golden Dawn. Some of them were what were called the flying rolls, which is a biblical reference to scrolls arriving from the deity. And these were sort of side papers or additional lectures or knowledge or considerations that didn't fall into the main course of the Golden Dawn teachings. The philosophers would also have to learn 4 of the knowledge lectures that were specifically for that grade. Each grade had a series of progressive knowledge lectures teaching correspondences, astrology, basic alchemy, and so forth. And side lectures, for example, geomantic talismans, the tree of life in the tarot, the Shemen Foresh, the divine name, the Chaldean oracles of Zoroaster, information about the Qliphoth was given to them. They'd also have to learn tattvas and geometric symbolism and numerological symbolism, all within that one grade. And each of the grade would be tested before applying to take the next grade and then be initiated within a ritual to the secrets or to the teachings of the next grade. So there was a gated system, and this is where our own idea of gated spreads comes from in Tarosophy, is a tarot version, a more accessible version of a ritual in your pocket by using the tarot as gates to initiate people, the practitioner of a particular gated spread, through particular experiences in a staged manner, that you cannot experience the next stage because you don't have the experience of the first or previous stages. And this is the way we can lock the teaching and make sure that it is only experienced by people who are actually going to be able to utilize that effectively for their own spiritual and mystical progression, not just their magical progression, and also to do that in a way that is psychologically sound and doesn't expose a lot of the shadow, it doesn't elevate aspects of the superego or reward the id and various other factors that we might take into consideration from the psychic, as in psychological level, of these teachings. So all of these need to be done in the order that is given, because that is an order that has been tested and has been developed over at least a century. So all of the cosmological schema in the Golden Dawn includes Kabbalah, ancient Egyptian magic, religious practices, Zoroastrianism, Hindu teachings, Western philosophies, Pythagorean philosophies in particular, and specific subjects such as talismans and tarot are a synthesis of other material, from a broad range of sources, which includes the magical grimoires and magical encyclopedias of John Dee, 1527 to 1608, Edward Kelly, of course, who worked with John Dee, 1555 to 1597, Agrippa, 1486 to 1535, whose three books on magical practice are the mainstay of the grimoire tradition, and Francis Barrett, who half-inched a lot of Agrippa's work on occult philosophy into his own work called the Magus, and he was born around 1780. Mathers, Woodman and Westcott put all of this together, used their SRIA background, Freemasonic structures, and then built a masterpiece of synthetic, magical, esoteric, spiritual, mystical teaching that is the Golden Dawn system itself. Now, both Aleister Crowley and A.E. Waite, two of the more notable students of the order, other than people like Yeats and Florence Farr and various others, Crowley and Waite took the teachings in two very different ways. Crowley took it into his own philosophy, which was born out of his background with his religious upbringing, his very strict religious upbringing with the Plymouth Brethren, and they had to do things like recite whole pieces of the Bible at meals and so forth, and Crowley took a lot of this into his thelemic system, which he called a form of scientific illuminism, a form of testable magic. Long before chaos magic came along with the idea, Crowley was a forerunner in that scientific approach, which is lost in a lot of his other work, his poetry, his mystical experience, his magic. But when you read his diaries, it's very evident that he was approaching it from what we would call a scientific point of view. Arthur Edward Waite took it more deeply into religion, into Catholicism, and when he left the Golden Dawn, which he sort of did twice at least, he then founded a group called the FRC, and within that we have Golden Dawn type rituals, but at the higher grades, for example, Adeptus Major, Adeptus Exemptus, and so forth, and those are very lengthy, more Catholic type rituals that actually require an awful lot of work to work yourself through them. But both of those come from the Golden Dawn. So Mathers really had a structure in mind. In earlier papers, he'd written that there should be a whole range of categories that one would learn magic in: preliminary, elemental, psychic, divination, magic, Enochian, and symbolic. So, for example, in the preliminary stages, one would learn correspondences, which is the big thing that I try and emphasize in my own teaching. Elemental work, which was constructing the magical tools, and we have great examples of the magical tools from, for example, Yeats, who actually, whilst being a notable poet in his own right, was also a Golden Dawn student and created his own magical items, which we still have records of. I can remember there was a time when we were doing the zodiac rituals in Nottingham in England, and we had constructed various magical tools for that. This is going back about 30 years or so now, and we had left them in a cupboard in a theosophical hall in Nottingham. And a little while later, unbeknownst to us, a Golden Dawn related person had come to give a lecture there from America, and they had come across all of our magical tools in this little cupboard that we'd left them in the theosophical hall. And they believed that the Theosophists actually had some secret Golden Dawn style magical order going on inside, and that was mentioned apparently at their talk, that they were in the presence of a actual secret magical order. So it's quite nice to have been a secret magical order within a secret magical order based on a secret magical order being talked about while someone was talking about a secret magical order. So you can see the way these things can tend to go. So you would learn correspondences, you would construct magical tools on the psychic level. According to Mathers, this is where all of the spirit vision and astral projection work comes in. And astral projection work for me is very much to do with the Theoricus grade. and we teach that in our own Order of Everlasting Day, and we teach it alongside the inner guide meditation and other visualization types of methods. So that's at the psychic level, but then we have divination, which includes astrology, geomancy and tarot. Then we have actual core magic that a lot of people are most interested in, which includes invocations, talismans, rising on the planes, astral visions and so forth. Then within the Golden Dawn they had Enochian teachings, which was later kicked out by BOTA when they half-inched and developed a lot of the Golden Dawn teachings. They felt, the Paul Foster case felt that Enochian was too dangerous, and so that was taken out. And within the Golden Dawn you would go on astral journeys for specific Enochian squares, magical squares. And then there'd be a symbolic category as well, where you would analyse the rituals. You'd analyse the neophyte ritual and the construction of a particular ritual. A ritual that is very good to deconstruct in the Golden Dawn is the ritual of consecrating a talisman, because that is really on 4 worlds, and very plainly on 4 worlds through its use of colours and symbolism. And you can really see the depth of the power of a properly constructed ritual within the Golden Dawn ritual of a consecration of a talisman. The robes that you wear, the colours of the talisman, the colours of the temple and so forth are all on different psychic layers, and this is done through the symbolism and the colours in the 4 worlds of the Tree of Life. And if you know the 4 worlds of the Tree of Life, if you know all of the correspondences to the colours, to the symbols, to the numbers, to the shapes on each of these 4 different worlds, then when you are doing the ritual, it really impacts you on all 4 worlds, and therefore it sets up a very powerful resonance, which is one of the metaphors, I guess, or symbols of how magic actually works, by tuning yourself to a particular resonance within the temple, and that resonance then vibrates out into your environment, into the entirety of the time-space continuum, and therefore you resonate according to one particular aspect of reality, and that aspect of reality then, in effect, manifests in its true sense as it arises in your awareness and your reality simultaneously. And this is really one of the core teachings that's underneath everything else. And again, we come back to the beginning where I was talking about how important it is to learn both the practice and the theory in order to make this work. It cannot just be done by performing the rituals. It can have an impact, but not necessarily the one you might want, and it can have unexpected side effects if you don't also have the correspondence system on board and operating as your, in effect, bespoke brain software. When you actually then fasten that to the hardware and install it in a ritual, and then you power it up like the Control, Alt and Delete of reality by invocation or evocation or divination, consecration and so forth, then the software, the hardware, the operating system, the motherboard, everything has to be compatible, let's say, in order to get that to work. You can get it to work if it isn't, but it's going to be a bit of a strange system and you may not always get the expected results from it. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the avenues that we can explore the Golden Dawn through. In whichever version you have, you should be able to find the knowledge lectures. And these really give us the basis of the correspondences. So you should be able to learn all of this by heart. So you should know the order of the zodiac, the elements, the triplicities, and the Hebrew letters as well. And you should be able to spell the names of the Sephiroth in Hebrew, and also know the tarot correspondences. So here, if we have Kether, which is Kaf Tau Resh, that is the wheel the world, and the sun card, the wheel, the world, and the sun. And that gives us a great way of actually analysing then, which I've done in several of my own books on tarot, Kether as the wheel, the world, and the sun, which are the tarot cards corresponding to the 3 Hebrew letters that spell Kether or Keter, depending on how you pronounce it. And that basically tells you that the entire universe is formed of rotation, movement, i.e. the wheel, but it's all unified. There's one axle. As one mathematician said, the world is a circle whose centre is everywhere, whose circumference is nowhere. That's Kaf, the wheel. Tau, which is the universe, which is matter, all time and space. And Resh, which of course is the sun, which is light. So the universe is time, space, and light. The wheel, the universe, and the sun. And that's buried within the correspondences of Kether, of the actual name of the first of the Sephiroth on the Tree of Life. And there we have the meanings of the Hebrew letters, which also give us some insight into the system of correspondences, and also some of the numerology, the value of them, that Crowley was far more into than the Golden Dawn. Crowley used to test his seers or scryers when they were having visions for him, and he would ask for a number or give a number to a spirit that was encountered, and based on the words that corresponded to that number through gematria, through numerology, he knew whether he was talking to the right spirit or not. Then also we have the Kabbalistic cross and the lesser ritual of the pentagram, or the lesser banishing ritual, LBPR, that it's also known by. And this is one of the first things I ever learnt, and other than meditation, and it's the practice that you should not only know by heart, but every time you have a nightmare, find yourself doing and waking up from whilst you're doing a pentagram. It should be ingrained into every magician's operating system, muscle memory, and everything else. And that has the 4 angels of the quarters: before me Raphael, behind me Gabriel, at my right hand Michael, upon my left hand Oriel. Before me flames the pentagram, and behind me shines the 6-rayed star, which is a Kabbalistic reference. Again, Crowley has a version of this called the Star Sapphire, but I would start with this one first. Get this one under your belt, literally first. Know how to draw a pentagram, like literally from your hip to your forehead, back down to your right hip, to your left shoulder, to your right shoulder, and back down to your left hip. And then over time you can learn how to change the direction you draw that pentagram to actually invoke and banish any of the 4 elements. So you can do a full elemental ritual just with modifications to the way you draw the pentagram, but that's for a bit later on. And then it has teachings on the pillars, which are quite interesting. And then it goes on to the second knowledge lecture, which has a lot on alchemy to learn. But again, unless you're really applying it, it's a bit empty. So as well as learning any of this, like the names of the green lion or the black dragon, get a decent book, for example, that I recommended in one of the videos talking about alchemy, for example, The Golden Game, and then take a look at some of the symbols in here, meditate on them with the knowledge lectures of the Golden Dawn, so that you're learning the symbolism and what this might actually signify in mystical experience and spiritual practice, and also to some extent magic. Then what else? So the next thing to really do is to learn the Tree of Life, and there's a lot on colour symbolism in the Golden Dawn, but I'm just trying to find the introduction to the Neophyte ceremony. Now, it's really important to read and learn the Neophyte ceremony in terms of its structure. So there's a whole lot of of information here about the structure, why it's that way, why it's laid out, why the particular teachings are given and what they signify. To some extent, some of it is hidden slightly for later, but learning the Tree of Life, learning the correspondences, learning the tarot, and looking at the neophyte ritual, I think is really important. For example, the placing of the different officers in a temple, even if you never really experience a neophyte ritual within a Golden Dawn temple, you can see here that it's 2 triangles. And those 2 triangles, when these officers move around the temple, around the candidate, as you walk through this, you don't know, but everyone else does if they know the symbolism. When these 2 triangles come together with you in front of the altar, then they form a hexagram, which is really important because that symbolizes yourself. It symbolizes Tiferet in the system. There are also various signs to learn and so forth, but really understanding, as it says here, the basic structure of the ceremonies is important, because that is the thing that the Golden Dawn failed to teach when it collapsed, is the linking between your experience within a ritual and the knowledge. It's no use just picking up a ritual and trying to do it unless you have all of these correspondences, like here it says the tarot card of the sun would be placed on the altar here. It wouldn't be a tarot card, it would be a picture about yay big, because the Golden Dawn never produced a tarot deck, strangely enough, and we'll look at that in a separate video on the Golden Dawn system. What else? So there is another section towards the back of this book called The Formula of the Magic, The Formula of the Magic of Light, an introduction to the practical working of the Z2 formula. And this is another breakdown of one of the rituals, of the neophyte ritual. And it tells you all of the bits of it and what's going on, the evocations and so forth. So consecration of talismans, that is a really useful ritual to look at because it tells you what you need to know in order to do it. And these breakdowns are really important. There is then a load of other stuff, but I would go then towards the back of this and really look at Book T, because this is where I've been teaching tarot for the last 35 years or so, is because it's the basic language of all of this stuff. So I knew I'd have to spend a few decades teaching tarot in order to get candidates ready for then knowing. It's a bit like learning a language, and then you take people to the place, you know, it's like learning French and then going to Paris. There's a big difference between just sitting in a classroom learning French and actually going around Paris being able to speak French. And so the tarot is our French, and the upper reaches of your mystical state are Paris, if I may pull that metaphor out a little bit. So what we have here is the language that you need in order to then explore and experience all of the other grades of the Tree of Life and be able to hold all of that teaching in some constructive way, some way that you can actually apply to your everyday life and not just have in the back of your head. It's really important to be able to apply this to your everyday life and experience. So all of the stuff here, I wouldn't necessarily go all the way into the tarot as it applies to the northern and southern hemispheres, unless you're really fascinated by that. Then there's a load of stuff about Enochian at the back, and again, I'd leave that until later. So really looking at the neophyte ritual, looking at its structure, looking at the correspondences, learning tarot, learning the names of the Tree of Life, it all sounds a bit dull and boring and a bit meaningless, but I can assure you, when you can look at, for example, the word Malkuth and immediately have the tarot card starting with the Hanged Man and Justice, the Hierophant, and so forth along that, and then sort of think, well, the Hebrew letters are interesting because Mem is water, Lamed is an ox goad, like a whip or goad that you'd use, Kaf is the palm of the hand, Vow is a nail, and Tau is a cross. And that's the word Malkuth, meaning kingdom in Hebrew. It always has been since the language was around. And isn't it a bit odd that the letters seem to also be quite symbolic, that there's a hand, a nail, a cross, a goad, water being splashed? That's a bit odd that the basic mythic core of Christianity and other religions of sacrifice, it's actually embedded in the word Malkuth. And that's a little bit strange. That's a little bit of a weird thing that doesn't really have an explanation, but perhaps it has this idea of resonance to it. So there are a lot of secrets within this, within your own experience, that you can have whilst investigating the Golden Dawn system. Do you need to be initiated? Do you need to join a formal order? I have been in passing parts of groups of occultists, and I would just refer to one experience that I had where I was attending in London a talk on the 100th anniversary, and then I think there was the 120th anniversary, and I attended both of them in London, and I think I gave a talk at the second one, but I don't recall, it was quite a while ago now. And I was at a pub, one of the famous London pubs near the British Museum, the haunt of occultists for all time, and talking with a group of people. And some of the people got up from the table and walked off, and the one remaining person at the table looked across at me and very seriously said, "I'm an Adeptus Major. What are you?" And I think my answer, if I'd have given one at the time, because I was a bit dumbfounded, would have been I'm bemused, because it just seemed really odd that these grades, this teaching, had been reduced to a label, in effect, a status, a symbol of progression, not necessarily being related to any actual progression through the initiation system, through mystical experience, through spiritual experience, through magical events and experience. So that's what I look for and used to look for in magical orders, until I realised I'd have to, and got sort of cajoled slightly into setting up the Order of Everlasting Day, that is basically the vehicle for all of the experience that I think I have, that I like to teach and like to share with other people. So if you want to experience some of this stuff, then we have the Crucible Club that's set up for that. It's a 1-year self-study, and that is our year and a day gateway to then apply to join the Order of Everlasting Day, where there's a small group of us who do this work all of the time. We practice occultism on a literal daily basis in our everyday life. We share our experiences and so forth in a slightly non-hierarchical, networked manner. But there are different versions of the Golden Dawn. There are groups like Amorc and Bota and a lot of other acronymed groups like the OTO, which is of the Thelemic side of things. Again, I would always just talk to people who are already members if you can. I would go to any actual face-to-face meetings if you can. I would get to know people on social media, of course, which you can now do, and just really weigh up whether that speaks to you or not, whether you're aware of some of the more negative aspects of particular groups, not from outside, because obviously there's a lot of noise and chatter that goes on between groups and people politics and all of this sort of thing. Some groups have long histories against each other, with each other. They used to be with each other, but now they've splintered, and so forth and so forth. So despite the very few people that are involved quite often, then there can be a lot more history than might otherwise appear to be generated from just a few people. So if there's more history and more infighting, or what you might call people politics in a group than actual teaching, then that's probably a bad sign, I would suggest to you. Okay then, so I hope we have taken a brief tour in the Golden Dawn. As ever, I think it's less important that I brain dump a load of stuff to you, which you can find in a book anyway, or online anyway. It's far better if I tell you where I would see the inroads, and also where I can give you an opportunity to ask questions. My main thing within esotericism is people are best served by their questions, and we can do a lot with questions. So please do ask questions down below. I'm more than happy to try and answer them if I can, from what my experience is. Okay, so again, I open the floor to your questions, and I look forward to seeing you in another video in this or my several other series that I've got running at the moment here on YouTube. Thanks a lot, and as ever, the worker is hidden in the workshop.